It's over. With those two words, Prime Minister Mark Carney confirmed what many have suspected for years. Canada is cutting off its historic dependence on the United States, and no one who's been paying attention is shocked by this move. After decades of being America's compliant neighbor, Canada has finally had enough. Canada ships 97.4% of its crude oil to the United States and sends 76% of its exports south of the border. But that economic subservience is ending. When Ontario Premier Doug Ford threatened to shut off electricity completely to 3 US states, he wasn't bluffing. This video exposes the real story behind Canada cuts off the US and why it's been inevitable for longer than most realize. Did you know that for every dollar Canada makes in international trade, 76 cents comes from the United States? This economic reality has shaped our nation for generations. The relationship runs deep, so deep that many Canadians have come to accept American economic dominance as simply the natural order of things. For nearly a century, Canada has operated in America's shadow. Our automotive factories in Windsor and Oshawa don't just assemble vehicles. They function as extensions of Detroit's manufacturing empire. Components cross the border multiple times before a single car is completed, creating an intricate dance of interdependence that has made Canada prosperous but vulnerable. Consider our energy sector. While Canada possesses the third largest oil reserves globally, we've built our infrastructure primarily to serve American markets. The massive pipeline networks don't connect Canadian regions to each other. They funnel our resources southward. When the US sneezes, our oil industry catches pneumonia, as we witnessed during the 2008 financial crisis when Canadian energy companies lost billions virtually overnight. Perhaps most telling is how Canada has handled its vast mineral wealth. Despite controlling significant percentages of the world's nickel, potash, and uranium, we've historically exported these raw materials to American processors who capture the higher value stages of production. The Sudbury nickel mines, for instance, have generated enormous wealth, but much of that value has been realized in American refineries and manufacturing facilities rather than Canadian ones. The frustration among Canadian business leaders has been building for decades. Former BlackBerry CEO Jim Balsillie once remarked that Canada had become a nation of happy resource hewers rather than innovation leaders. This sentiment reflects a growing recognition that our economic relationship with the US has stunted Canada's industrial development. There have been moments of resistance. The National Energy Program of the 1980s attempted to assert greater Canadian control over our oil resources, but fierce American opposition and internal divisions ultimately led to its dismantling. Similarly, efforts to develop a distinctly Canadian auto policy in the 1960s eventually gave way to continental integration that prioritized American corporate interests. Warning signs of this relationship's unsustainability have been flashing for years. When American housing markets collapsed in 2008, Canada's export-dependent economy suffered disproportionately. When the US imposed softwood lumber duties despite winning trade disputes, it revealed how economic power trumped legal frameworks in the relationship. And when Canadian technology companies regularly relocated south after achieving success, it demonstrated the gravitational pull of American markets. The truth is that Canada's economic sovereignty has been gradually eroding for generations. American policies on everything from environmental regulations to tax structures have effectively dictated Canadian economic choices, not because of explicit coercion, but because of the sheer weight of our dependence. Quick pause. If you're enjoying this video, we'd really appreciate it if you could like and subscribe to the channel. Did you know over 98% of viewers watch without subscribing? Subscribing is free and it helps us create more content you love. So go ahead and hit that button. It only takes a second. Thanks so much. And now, back to the video. After decades of quiet submission to American economic dominance, a single presidential signature on tariff legislation shattered the illusion of partnership. The 25% tax on Canadian vehicles wasn't just a policy decision, it was the moment Canada was forced to recognize that its greatest economic strength might actually be its ability to say no. President Trump's tariff announcement hit Ontario like a thunderbolt. Within hours, production lines in Oakville and Brampton halted, as automotive executives calculated the devastating math-selling Canadian-made vehicles with a 25% markup would make them utterly uncompetitive in the American market. The 10% tariff on critical minerals like potash simultaneously threatened Saskatchewan's agricultural sector, with economists projecting immediate job losses exceeding 40,000. The response from Canada's leadership was both swift and unprecedented. Mark Carney, former Bank of Canada governor, delivered the statement that captured headlines worldwide. The economic relationship, as we've known it, is over. Not damaged, not strained, over. This wasn't diplomacy as usual language, but a declaration of economic independence that signaled a fundamental policy realignment. Even more surprising was Ontario Premier Doug Ford's public threat to cut electricity exports to New York and Michigan. "They need our power more than we need their market," Ford stated bluntly, shocking many who had long viewed him as America's staunchest Canadian ally. When traditionally pro-American conservative politicians start threatening energy supplies, something profound has shifted in the national consciousness. The tariffs revealed an uncomfortable truth for Washington. While Canada had grown dependent on American markets, America had grown equally dependent on Canadian resources. Over 40% of uranium powering American nuclear plants comes from Canadian mines. Nearly all the potash needed for America's agricultural productivity crosses the northern border. The electricity that lights New York City flows from Quebec hydroelectric dams. This realization catalyzed a remarkable political unity across Canada's notoriously divided landscape. In an extraordinary joint press conference, Liberal Prime Minister Trudeau stood shoulder to shoulder with Conservative opposition leader Pierre Poilievre and NDP leader Jagmeet Singh to announce a unified response. "This isn't about politics," Poilievre stated, "but about Canada's future as an independent nation." Canada's countermeasures went beyond symbolic retaliatory tariffs. Within weeks, the government announced a comprehensive economic sovereignty package, $4.2 billion for affected industries, expedited permits for new processing facilities to keep resources in Canada, and targeted tariffs on American goods that couldn't be easily sourced elsewhere. Most significantly, Canada began leveraging its control over critical minerals, implementing new export controls that prioritized domestic processing and friendly trade partners. These weren't just defensive measures. They represented a strategic recognition that Canada's resource wealth provided leverage in a resource-constrained world. Canada's leverage over critical minerals isn't just opening doors to new negotiations, it's creating a pathway to entirely new global alignments. As domestic debates about tariffs consume headlines, diplomatic channels between Ottawa and the economic powerhouse known as BRICS have suddenly become remarkably active. The BRICS coalition, Brazil, Russia, India, China and South Africa, has been steadily building an alternative to Western economic dominance for years. And now Canada appears to be quietly positioning itself to join this influential bloc. BRICS isn't just some obscure international club. Together, these nations represent over 40% of the global population and 25% of the world economy. More importantly, they have established their own development bank with $100 billion in capital, created currency swap arrangements to reduce dependence on the US dollar, and are actively recruiting new members to expand their collective influence. The addition of Canada would represent a seismic shift in North American power dynamics. Canadian diplomats have been making discreet visits to Beijing, New Delhi and Sao Paulo with increasing frequency. These aren't just courtesy calls, they're substantive negotiations centered around the very resources now subject to American tariffs. Chinese officials have reportedly offered preferential access to their massive manufacturing sector for Canadian minerals, while India has proposed joint development of processing facilities for rare earths and uranium that would serve Asian markets. What makes this potential realignment particularly powerful is how it dovetails with Canada's emerging critical minerals strategy. By controlling approximately 13 of the 35 minerals deemed essential for future technologies, Canada holds tremendous leverage in negotiations with both Western allies and Eastern economic powers. The European Union has already approached Ottawa with proposals for dedicated supply chains that bypass American intermediaries entirely. Canadian diplomatic corps has been rapidly expanding in non-traditional markets. Embassy staffing in Vietnam has tripled, while new trade offices have opened across Southeast Asia and Africa. The message is clear. Canada is no longer putting all its economic eggs in the American basket. Even traditional allies like the United Kingdom and Australia are being courted with resource partnership proposals that would have been unimaginable just 5 years ago. Perhaps most telling is how rapidly Canadian businesses are responding to these diplomatic signals. Major mining companies like Teck Resources and Lundin Mining have established dedicated Asian market divisions. Manufacturing firms that once focused exclusively on North American integration are now redesigning supply chains to connect with partners in Europe and Asia. The Toronto Stock Exchange has even created a special trading desk specifically to facilitate investment from BRICS nations. For ordinary Canadians, this global pivot could translate into tangible benefits. Economic modeling suggests that diversifying trade partnerships could generate up to 180,000 new jobs in processing and manufacturing sectors over the next decade. Consumer prices for many goods could actually decrease as Canadian producers gain access to more competitive global suppliers rather than remaining captive to American pricing. The promise of new jobs through global trade diversification masks an even more radical shift happening right under our noses. For over a century, Canada has played a predictable role: extract resources, ship them south, and buy back finished products at markup. Now, in boardrooms across Ottawa, a daring economic rebellion is taking shape that could permanently alter North America's power dynamics. At the heart of this transformation is Canada's critical minerals processing strategy, a $3.8 billion initiative to build domestic refineries and manufacturing plants for everything from lithium to cobalt. This isn't just another government program, it's a declaration of economic independence. The plan offers manufacturers a 30% tax credit on equipment used to process Canadian resources within Canadian borders, effectively ending the practice of shipping raw materials abroad. The transition won't be easy. Canada lacks the specialized workforce needed for advanced manufacturing after generations of brain drain to American factories. Engineering schools report record enrollments, but it will take years to develop the necessary talent pool. Meanwhile, established American companies are fighting back, slashing prices on finished goods to undercut emerging Canadian competitors. But Canada has an ace up its sleeve, some of the cleanest electricity on the planet. With over 60% of its power grid already running on renewables, Canada is positioning itself as the global leader in carbon-neutral manufacturing. The new Made in Canada, Powered by Canada certification program has already attracted major players like BMW, which recently announced plans for a $2.2 billion battery manufacturing facility in Quebec, specifically citing the clean energy advantage. We're moving from being drawers of water and hewers of wood to becoming makers of things and processors of our own materials, explained Innovation Minister François-Philippe Champagne at the facility's groundbreaking. This is our economic sovereignty moment. The revolution extends beyond mining. In Alberta, the $1.8 billion Petrochemical incentive program is transforming the province's relationship with its oil. Instead of piping crude south, new facilities are producing everything from medical plastics to advanced carbon fibers. The program has already created 4,200 permanent manufacturing jobs in a province long dependent on resource extraction alone. Perhaps most impressive is how Canada is using revenue from countervailing duties to fund this transition. The $652 million Supply Chain Resilience Fund provides direct support to companies developing domestic alternatives to American suppliers. Windsor-based auto parts manufacturer FlexEngate used this funding to open a semiconductor division that now supplies electronic components previously imported from Michigan. For ordinary Canadians, the benefits are becoming tangible. In Sudbury, where nickel ore once left by the trainload, the new processing employment benefit provides $6,000 tax credits to workers who join the processing sector. Housing developments are springing up around these new facilities, revitalizing communities once resigned to watching their resources and their children leave for opportunities elsewhere. What we're witnessing isn't just a Canadian story, it's the opening chapter of a new global economic order. The multipolar world has arrived, and Canada's pivot represents the first major realignment among Western allies. This time, Canada's resource independence strategy has teeth. Unlike previous attempts, today's global resource scarcity creates unprecedented leverage. Critical minerals needed for renewable technology, clean water reserves, and food security position Canada not as America's junior partner, but as a kingmaker in the new resource economy. The fundamental question has shifted. It's no longer if Canada can survive without American markets, but if America can maintain its economic dominance without privileged access to Canadian resources. Thanks for watching. Canada's historic break from US economic dependence isn't just a headline. It may be the beginning of a global power shift, but here's the real question. Do you believe Canada made the right move by cutting ties with the US economy? Or has this pivot come too late to matter? Let me know what you think in the comments below. Is this Canada's moment of sovereignty, or are we risking too much too fast? If this video helped clarify the bigger picture, be sure to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more in-depth breakdowns on Canada's role in the emerging global economy. Want to understand more about the future of Canadian trade, energy, and geopolitical power? Choose any of the videos now on your screen.